All right, so we're on a new fresh server. It seems to be running very well. Let's get a ship. Let's get started because we got plenty to talk about today. Today, we're going to be dealing with a very interesting topic, which is player agency, player freedom to change the world, to affect the world that they're in, to make choices that suit them. Sometimes it's not even the world, sometimes it's just their character. Let's try this again. So, players' ability to make choices which can change outcomes in the world, but it can also come down to very little things like allowing players to customize their ship, make their ship look the way they want it to. It varies to certain degrees, but in general, what it is it's giving players the freedom to express themselves either through their character's actions or their character's appearance, whatever within a game universe. And generally, the more agency you have, the better a game is received. So let's get into it. Fuck. Player agency. It means, oddly enough, a lot of things to a lot of people. Everything from changing the way your ship looks or your character looks, your armor, whatever, being able to customize it to suit your own personal tastes. Some people view that as player agency. I would argue that, yeah, loosely it is. But within a game's defined systems, there is often a problem, a conflict between developers and players. Now, if you look at Star Citizen as an example, we know there's a component system. We know it's somewhat implemented, though obviously not to the extent that has been promised. Though, I mean, understandably, things are going through the process, and we are on that road. There's going to be components, there's going to be subcomponents that are possibly going to modify the way certain ship systems work. It's a very exciting thing. Now, some players might go, it doesn't really sound all that exciting, but within that system, there lies the possibility that a player can figure out an unintended way to do something that more often than not causes game developers to panic. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say we're a year down the road in Star Citizen's development. The subcomponent system has come online. Players are able to customize their ships to do different things, to suit their different tasks. You know, everyone's receiving it well. CIG decides, you know what, let's launch a special piece of content for players, something exciting to do in a group. We're going to make it so within the Stanton system, the system that we're in, we're going to make it so that a marauding Vanduul cruiser is going to show up within this system. Their intention is that players will have to band together in local chat. They'll be like, oh my God, there's a Vanduul cruiser out there. You know, you kill it, you get certain rewards, maybe an achievement, all kinds of cool stuff. And they intend for you to form up these great big colossal fleets and have this giant battle. That's their vision. That's their idea. That's what they want to take place in the game. That's the way they want things to play out. But then, somewhere along the line, a player figures out, hey, you know what? That Vanduul cruiser uses a certain type of sensor to lock onto other ships and return fire. What if I took my Herald and I was able to specially configure it so that it was only built to suppress that specific type of sensors on that specific frequency? If I had the freedom, because I knew what frequency, whatever frequency I was going for, I could really crank up the power on that single Herald, or maybe a couple of Heralds. I could really get it to the point that I could suppress that Vanduul cruiser's lock range down so small that I could bring in, say, just a couple of friends and a couple of Idrises or a couple of Polarises, and I could go in, immediately suppress that cruiser's sensors, and then we could just pummel it with the Polaris until it died, and then we could just take all the loot. And we could do this in a much smaller team. Originally, CIG was like, oh no, we want everybody. Let's say 50 people on the server. We're still at that point. We want all 50 people, 50 ships, or a whole bunch of ships coming together to defeat this thing. We want it to be a big battle. And then all of a sudden, somebody figures out how to do it in 3 or 4 people. And most game companies will see something like that, and they will panic. Like, no, that's not how we intended you to do it. We had a very clear vision, and you're breaking it. And so they'll nerf it, they'll shut it down, they'll kill it. And I would argue that having things like that in a game is actually better for the game. Any game system that really has holes in it, that has these kind of blind spots for developers, and they always exist. You might have 500 people working on the game in CIG, but you have potentially 1 million people or more who are going to play Star Citizen. And this is no insult to the developers, but the accumulated brain power that is out there in the player audience is always going to be greater than the brain power that is within the game development studio. It's true of every single game. You can look at just about any game, any long-lived game's history, and you can see times where players have, through some combination of items or armor or enchantments or equipment or phasers or photon torpedoes or whatever, have figured out a way to break the game system and do something a lot more easily than the developers intended. And always the result is to stamp it out, to crush it, to destroy it, to get rid of it, to nerf it, to close the door. And I would argue that that is possibly one of the worst things that you can do, because what the players are actually doing is expressing themselves creatively. In that scenario that I gave you, I would suggest that rather than CIG go into that situation and say, well, let's nerf the Herald and let's kill its power, maybe they should look at, well, you know what, let's set up this cruiser with a supplementary sensor system that can't be jammed. And so maybe a couple of fighters got to sneak in there real close and blow that thing up, and then they can do that thing if you want to nerf it. Or you can just sit there and say, you know what, these players have figured out the secret to the puzzle, and now all of a sudden Herald players are in demand because they've got this skill set that they can do this thing, or maybe it can expand onto other ships. Or it'll encourage other players to just kind of sit back and say, hey, that ship that I thought was only for this, maybe I can also do that with it. And it allows them to kind of go in there and to really get into the game systems and start thinking around their problems creatively, not just say, okay, it says get a big 50-man fleet together. Well, what are the other ways that I could do this? It allows players to think of different ways to solve that puzzle. And maybe, if you see something like that and you say, oh, well, now everyone's just going to go for the Herald Polaris combo, maybe it's time to open up a few more doors. Like, let's think about, the railgun on the Idris, right? This is the big spinal railgun that's on the Idris. It's something that I don't believe we've ever seen in operation. I think they kind of tried to work it into a gameplay demo once, but I don't think that it really appeared. I'm going to go with that it didn't appear, but let's say all of a sudden you open up a door where someone could say, okay, you know what? We're gonna make it so that if you've got a really expert gunner on your Idris, someone who's really, really good with the railgun, if you can manage to hit that cruiser right in its sensor quad or equipment device thing, whatever, if you can manage to hit it right in that spot, right in the pickle barrel, then you can shut down its sensors and you can achieve the same effect. So everyone's like, okay, now there's the Herald solution, now there's the Idris solution, and people are going to start looking for more and different creative ways to kind of solve that puzzle with different ships, and it can lead to a lot of enjoyment. And oftentimes, when I look at a lot of video games, and WoW is certainly an example of this, I find that developers are going in a very dark path. They're kind of going on this kind of RNG loot system path where they're like, let's just keep them rolling on the slot machine. Let's keep them, that's how we get them engaged. So we get them to keep just pulling the lever on the slot machine. And I would argue that what gets players even more engaged in that is the ability to express themselves creatively to solve problems. When you even, like, let's say someone comes out with a YouTube video and says, here's how you do the Herald thing to beat the ship, and then you get the rewards, and people might panic and look at that and say, no, we got to shut that down, we got to nerf the Herald and we got to get rid of that. I would argue just kick open more doors and just say, you know what, no, you know what, and here's some other ways that you can think of. I always think that when you look at these situations, like an RNG loot system, things like that, I think that that's a negative way to keep players engaged. And I think if you allow players to express themselves creatively in their problem solving, that is a much better way to keep players engaged in a game and to keep them thinking of the game in a positive way while they're doing it, instead of playing the game and going like, I hate this. I really, really hate this, and I wish this would, you know, I want to like this game more, but I just hate this system or that system. I think that if you allow players to kind of express themselves creatively in their problem solving and how they develop, whether it's a ship, whether it's a class, whether it's a torpedo or it's a sword, if you allow themselves to solve the problems creatively rather than the one fixed solution that you want them to use, I think that you end up with a much better game. And I really see the component and the sub-component system and all these different, you know, freedoms that we're supposed to have in terms of being able to customize our ships. I really see this as the foundation of that system. And that's one of the things that gets me really excited about Star Citizen. So just some thoughts on that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.